All right, buckle up. Because today we're diving into a place that's both incredibly rich in natural treasures like rare earth minerals and oil, and yet it's one of the harshest spots on our entire planet. We're talking about a massive island, home to just a handful of Inuit people. Even though it's technically part of the Kingdom of Denmark, this place has a strong chance of becoming fully independent if its residents, few as they are, decide to make that leap. The real kicker here? Control over this region is something that makes many global powers practically drool, and we're going to spill all the beans about why right now. Get ready, because we're shining a spotlight on Greenland, that giant, icy enigma everyone seems to be talking about. Let's get a quick overview of how this unique territory actually works. Greenland is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. It's been running its own show kind of since a self-government act passed in 1979, which then got a big upgrade in 2009. Politically, Greenland has its very own parliament, called the Inatsisartut, made up of 31 members. Plus, there's an executive government, the Naalakkersuisut, which is headed by a local prime minister. While Denmark still handles the heavy lifting of defense and foreign policy, the big global stuff, Greenland gets to manage most of its internal affairs. And here's the crucial part. It has direct control over its own natural resources. That means a pretty decent chunk of change can flow into their coffers if they play their cards right. On the international stage, even though Denmark formally represents them, Greenland isn't just sitting quietly in the corner. They're actively involved in big discussions about the Arctic and climate change, making their voice heard where it counts. Geographically speaking, Greenland is an absolute beast. It's the largest island in the world, covering more than 2 million square kilometers. But here's the catch. A whopping 84% of that area is swallowed up by a colossal ice sheet, which can be up to 3 kilometers thick in some places. Back in 2004, Denmark decided to stake a claim on nearly 1 million square kilometers of the Arctic. This massive chunk includes the North Pole and the Lomonosov Ridge, an underwater mountain range that, surprise, surprise, Russia and Canada are also eyeing up. This region is unbelievably valuable strategically because it sits right between North America, Russia, and Europe. It's close to what people call the Yuck passages. That's Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom. And the Yin passages, which connect Greenland, Iceland, and Norway. And yes, we know, it seems like staking claims on bits of the Arctic is the new hot trend these days, doesn't it? Well, that's a whole lot easier when the land you're claiming is, for the most part, completely empty. Greenland, in a nutshell, is sparsely populated. To give you an idea, the population density is a mind-boggling 0.14 people per square kilometer. It's a territory 50 times larger than mainland Denmark, but it holds only 1% of Denmark's total population. Now, let's be frank, the people living there aren't exactly enjoying a life of luxury. The education levels are low, there are barely any roads connecting settlements, and their trade balance is, well, frankly, a bit of a disaster. Definitely in the red. Their economy relies almost entirely on fishing, and unfortunately, issues like alcoholism and suicide rates are shockingly high. It's no wonder that some Greenlanders are starting to view Denmark as more of a burden than a solution. While the two main political parties right now, the Social Democrats and the Socialists, are focused on securing economic autonomy first, some smaller, more radical groups are pushing for a complete break, even if it means a potential drop in living standards. The hard truth is that economically, Greenland's reliance on Denmark is still immense. But that could all change if Greenland had some new goodies to offer potential trading partners, right? Looking back, Greenland has been a key spot for mineral exploitation since the mid-19th century, with copper and cryolite being among the first targets. As the 20th century rolled on, mining expanded to other resources like zinc, lead, and silver. Coal extraction kicked off in 1906, and uranium was discovered in 1956, actively mined until the 1980s when Denmark put a stop to its nuclear development plans. Then, in the 1970s, oil and gas exploration began. This was paused for a bit, but then ramped up again in the 1990s. Why? Because estimates showed significant offshore oil and gas reserves to the northeast and northwest of Greenland. To put it into perspective, the deposits there are thought to be equivalent to half of Denmark's known reserves, which could be a game changer for Greenland's economy in the long run. The real challenge, though, is that we've seen in many other places how black gold can bring more misfortune than fortune if a country trying to capitalize on it doesn't have a strong, diversified economy. That's why in 2021, the government actually announced an end to fossil fuel exploitation. With mineral resources, the need for robust infrastructure is non-negotiable. Most of these exploitation areas are in hard-to-reach zones, and only massive projects would even be feasible. This creates another problem. The local workforce is tiny, and getting resources and people to the island is incredibly expensive. Regarding uranium, Denmark has fully embraced denuclearization and simply isn't interested in that kind of energy. Yet, in 2013, the Greenlandic Parliament repealed the ban on uranium exploitation. However, this ban made a dramatic comeback in 2021, even though there were already 70 active mining exploration licenses. You see, the uranium issue is deeply intertwined with rare earth minerals. Generally, where you find rare earths, you often find uranium. And guess what? Greenland is sitting on a staggering 10% of the world's total rare earth supply. In fact, the Kvanefjeld site is believed to be the second largest rare earth and uranium mine in the entire world. This specific mine project has been a huge deal in Greenland's internal politics. Back in 2016, the company focused on mining at Kvanefjeld had a major Chinese firm as its primary shareholder. After the 2021 elections, two pro-independence parties, who strongly opposed the mine due to environmental and safety concerns, came into power. It looked like this ambitious project for uranium and rare earth exploitation was finally canceled. But even today, the debate over the mine's future is still wide open. And it's a debate where not only the few indigenous inhabitants have a say, but indirectly, the major global powers are also deeply invested, pulling strings from behind the scenes. Right now, according to surveys, the desire for independence is pretty strong among Greenlanders. But there's a big if, only if it doesn't mean a drop in their quality of life. Which, let's be honest, is totally logical. The country is heavily subsidized, and replacing that aid economy with resource exploitation seems like the only viable path to genuine independence. Yet, the situation is far more complex than a simple economic equation. Greenland actually lacks experienced political leaders, the kind who can navigate the tricky waters of state building. It looks like the emergence of an independent Inuit state could very well lead to a highly vulnerable entity in our current, unstable and dynamic global landscape. Such a new nation would need serious backing, probably not too different from, or perhaps even better than, what Denmark currently offers. However, it's worth noting that strong support from the United States could significantly bolster Greenlandic claims over those 895,000 square kilometers of the Arctic Ocean, claims that are currently clashing with those made by Canada and Russia. In conclusion, it's like a flock of vultures is circling above Greenland, waiting for the moment when this territory decides to fly solo into independence. So, who exactly are these keen observers? Well, first on the list, of course, is the United States. For the Americans, Greenland's mineral and energy resources, combined with its crucial strategic position in the Arctic, could be a cornerstone in their climb for regional control. Relations with Greenland are generally good, and geologically speaking, Greenland is actually part of the North American continent. Furthermore, the U.S. is keen to expand and strengthen its military presence, building on existing facilities like the Thule Air Base already on the island. It's worth remembering that as far back as the 1860s, U.S. President Andrew Johnson highlighted Greenland's importance for its resources and strategic location. And nearly a century later, in 1946, President Harry Truman even offered the Danish government a cool $100 million in gold to buy Greenland. Talk about a historic real estate deal. Of course, the Asian giant, China, is another huge player eyeing Greenland. Geographically, China is much further from the Arctic than Russia or the United States. Even so, China proudly labels itself a near-Arctic power. This isn't just a random label, it's a strategic move. For now, China sees Greenland as a fundamental waypoint in its Polar Silk Road initiative. This northern route would slash about a week off the shipping time between Asian and European ports, offering a much-needed alternative to the heavily congested and geopolitically sensitive Strait of Malacca. What's more, Chinese investment funds present Greenlanders with an alternative to their absolute reliance on Denmark, which conveniently fuels the island's nationalist ambitions. Incidentally, China is already involved in 4 mining initiatives in Greenland, operated by both state-owned and private companies, all perfectly aligned with Beijing's broader geopolitical goals. These 4 projects include the Kvanefjell site for rare earth extraction, the Isua project for iron mining, the Bjerringbro-Halbo project for copper, and finally the Citronen Fjord project. Finally, while Russia doesn't have a direct, dominant role specifically in relation to Greenland, it absolutely holds a predominant position across the entire Arctic region. Russia is the country with the largest military presence in this zone, cleverly repurposing facilities that date back to the Soviet era. Russia effectively dominates the Northern Sea route, which the Kremlin considers its main national communication channel, a vital artery. Moreover, it boasts by far the largest fleet of icebreaker vessels in the world. However, this route isn't yet a fully viable and cost-effective alternative to the Strait of Malacca, but it's very likely to become one soon. Right now, there's a quiet Cold War brewing between the major global powers, all vying for control over a part of the world that, until recently, was practically uncharted territory for humanity. And when I talk about these major powers, I'm referring naturally to the United States, the European Union, Russia, and even China. Yes, folks, the battle for control of the Arctic has already begun, and we're going to hear a lot more about it in the coming years, but why exactly are these big powers so incredibly interested in the Arctic? Who's winning this peculiar, frosty war? And could this conflict escalate into a hypothetical global showdown? Well, make yourself comfortable because we're about to unpack all of that right now. Trade between Asia and Europe has constantly evolved, pushed forward by technology and human ingenuity. In the beginning, Portuguese and Spanish traders connected with their Asian territories and local kingdoms via an absolutely brutal route. To bring back precious goods like spices, porcelain, or silk, ships had to cross the Indian Ocean and completely circumnavigate Africa. Fortunately, the cost and time involved in trading with the Far East plummeted sharply in the 19th century, thanks to the Industrial Revolution. This era gave us faster ships that could carry far more cargo. But the real game changer was the completion of the Suez Canal in 1869. This canal dramatically shortened that infernal route around Africa, creating a direct path through the Mediterranean Sea. The Suez Canal is, even today, a vital artery in global trade. It's the highway for almost all ships traveling between Asia and Europe. In fact, many of you will remember when the Ever Given container ship got stuck in the canal, blocking it for days and causing a massive headache for global maritime trade. We even saw many ships forced to return to the old, long route around Africa. But why am I telling you all this? Well, it's because a new technological leap, combined with global warming that's melting the Arctic's once impenetrable ice, has allowed humans to create enormous, heavy icebreaker ships. Many of these are nuclear-powered behemoths, capable of forging a brand new commercial route between Asia and Europe. This new path saves a ton of time and consequently, a heap of money. Oh, and for those who might not know, a huge number of ships coming from Asia to Europe are heading for the impressive port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. If this Arctic route looks longer on a flat map, that's just an optical illusion caused by representing our spherical Earth on a two-dimensional surface. Let me show you a slightly better map. Now you can really see the difference, right? So let's mark down our first big reason why the Arctic is so important. It offers the best, most efficient trade route between Asia and Europe. But controlling this shiny new trade route isn't the only temptation drawing the major powers to the Arctic. Because of its extreme climatic conditions, that is because it's colder than a polar bear's toenail, the Arctic has barely been explored. The natural resources hidden there are practically untouched, sitting pristine beneath the ice. And we're not talking about a small quantity here. While the full extent hasn't been precisely measured yet, experts believe the Arctic holds a vast amount of oil, potentially around 90 billion barrels. That's about 13% of the world's known reserves, putting it in direct competition with the oil-rich Middle East. In fact, oil giants like Shell have already poured tens of millions of dollars into Arctic prospecting. But wait, there's more. No one doubts there's also a massive amount of natural gas, possibly representing 30% of global reserves. Evidence for this can be found in nearby deposits like those on the Kola Peninsula or in northern West Siberia. But hold on, it's not just about fossil fuels. Did you think that was all? Nope. The Arctic also contains diamonds. Canadians know this well, with the Akati mine already having produced several tons of this precious mineral. Similarly, the Arctic is expected to harbor significant quantities of gold and, you guessed it, more rare earth minerals. As if all this wasn't enough, there's one last great treasure in the ocean: fishing opportunities. The melting ice is opening up vast new territories for large fishing vessels, allowing them to harvest species that were previously inaccessible. So it's pretty clear the Arctic is a sweet spot, a juicy plum for the big global players, right? Excellent. Now let's take a look at who's leading the charge in this conquest, and more importantly, who actually owns the Arctic. Well, depending on who you ask, for decades, Denmark, Canada, Russia, Norway, and the United States have been locked in a territorial wrestling match, trading blows with competing claims. According to international maritime law, your territorial waters generally extend 320 kilometers from your coastline. However, if your continental shelf, that shallow underwater landmass that's basically the continuation of the continents beneath the sea, stretches further than those 320 kilometers, then the waters above that extended shelf are considered yours. This technicality has turned the underwater Lomonosov Ridge into the most fiercely coveted prize in the Arctic. And naturally, nobody can agree on who owns it, or even where each country's continental shelf truly begins or ends. The country that so far has best prepared for this Cold War is undeniably Russia. Back in 2007, Russia restarted its strategic aerial patrols with bomber aircraft and beefed up its Coast Guard service in the Arctic. On top of that, Russia boasts the largest icebreaker fleet in the world, with over 40 vessels, including the two most powerful ones on the planet, the Arktika-class icebreakers. These giants are nuclear-powered and pack an incredible 75,000 horsepower. All of this, combined with the upgrading of several Russian ports along the Arctic coast, cements Russia's position as the primary player in the region. In fact, President Putin has set an ambitious goal: to increase the volume of traffic along the new Arctic route from the 32.97 million tons transported in 2020 to a massive 80 million tons by 2024. That's no small feat. The United States, for its part, has made it clear it will defend its interests in the Arctic against Russian advancement. The U.S. has a different stance from Russia, mainly because the Americans simply cannot justify claiming sovereignty over the entire Arctic. Therefore, Uncle Sam argues that these new maritime routes must be considered international waters, and all countries need to cooperate to maintain security in the area. Still, the United States often leads NATO military exercises in the Arctic. One of the most significant was held in Norway, involving 50,000 troops who simulated responding to an invasion by a foreign power. I wonder who that might be. The American giant also has ongoing disputes with Canada over the Beaufort Sea and with Russia over the Bering Sea and Strait. The big problem for the U.S. is that it desperately needs to expand its icebreaker fleet. It currently only has one, and it dates back to the 1970s. Yes, they are building the largest one in the world, but it won't be ready until 2025. Canada, meanwhile, claims the territories known as the Canadian Arctic Archipelago as its own. If successful, this would mean the waters of the Northwest Passage would be Canadian, giving the country full control over it. Canada also argues that the disputed Lomonosov Ridge is connected to its continental shelf and is therefore rightfully theirs. However, Canada has faced opposition not just from Russia and the United States, but even from the European Union, which considers these waters international. Because of this, Canada has begun to arm itself, preparing to defend what it sees as its territory from potential incursions by the Americans, Russians, or even the Danes. And speaking of Denmark, it has poured over 400 million euros into research to determine how far its continental shelf extends north of Greenland. Remember, Greenland belongs to Denmark. After all that research, Denmark has claimed an area of 895 by 141 square kilometers, which includes the coveted Lomonosov Ridge. By the way, you might recall that in 2019, Donald Trump famously announced, with much fanfare, that he wanted to buy Greenland from Denmark, a proposal that, understandably, really irked the Danish government. And to add another layer of complexity, Greenland also happens to sit on one of the world's largest deposits of rare earth minerals. In any case, despite Denmark's interest in the area, the European Union is primarily pushing for free navigation throughout the Arctic. Norway, on the other hand, boasts the Svalbard archipelago, a place famously known for housing the global seed vault. This is essentially a Noah's Ark for plant life, safeguarding hundreds of thousands of seed samples to protect global biodiversity in case of a major catastrophe. Norway has been the least confrontational country in this race, even reaching a long-awaited agreement with Russia on their maritime borders in the Barents Sea, finally ending a decades-long dispute. And finally, we have a new player making waves in the Arctic: China. Wait a minute, China? Yes, folks. Despite the Arctic being 900 miles from its coastline, China has a very active Arctic policy. And as a major global exporter, it's keen to stick its nose into this promising new trade route. In fact, China already has an icebreaker, and has even bought licenses from Russia to explore for oil in the Arctic. Moscow, you see, is well aware that its economy isn't exactly flush with cash, so it views Beijing as a potential investment partner, crucial for developing the technologies and infrastructure needed to extract natural resources on a large scale in the Arctic region, and preferably in the short term. Essentially, if Russia wants to fully exploit the Arctic's riches, it's going to need Chinese money. It's no surprise that in December 2017, Putin personally invited Xi Jinping to connect China's Belt and Road Initiative with the Arctic route, proposing the creation of a polar Silk Road. This arrangement would be a win-win for both. Russia would gain a powerful ally to help control the Arctic, and China would get a golden bridge for its goods, potentially cutting delivery times to Europe by up to 40% with all the massive savings that implies. And to all of this, we must add the actions of Greenpeace. While their efforts are often symbolic, they have a huge global impact, encouraging many people to oppose the exploitation of Arctic resources. This can significantly influence the policies adopted by Western democracies. So, in the midst of all this, and every interested party will do everything in its power to control the Arctic, its resources, and its routes. Military escalation appears inevitable as technology advances and the ice continues to melt, inevitably raising tensions to a boiling point. But now it's your turn. What do you think will happen? Can the United States, Europe, and Canada really halt Russian expansionism and China's growing influence in the Arctic?